advance. Okay, so now for our main speaker. Now, if you're here tonight, you probably love food, history, or art. But you're also asking, what does food, history, and art have to do with how do they fit together? And to answer that question, Carolyn Tillie is going to help us with that, because she is a culinary historian and an artist. And hopefully she'll be able to explain to us how they all fit together. Carolyn has a master's degree in fine arts, in jewelry and metalsmithing from the California State University of Long Beach. She also has a master's chef certificate from the Epicurean School in Los Angeles, along with a level 2 certification from the Wine Spirit Education Trust. She has given lectures on culinary historical themes and consulted with art galleries and museums. And somehow she still has time to create and exhibit food-themed jewelry and artwork. And you can see a lot of that over there in the table, and she'll be here after her presentation as well if you'd like to talk to her more about that. And finally, as co-founder of the Bay Area Culinary Historian Group, Carolyn has helped stage Victorian-era feasts and Roman-era banquets. So we have an expert here. So tonight, Carolyn will walk us through how food not only provides sustenance, but also how food has helped define cultures and rituals throughout our history.
Thank you so much. And like every good speaker, I only finished the lecture an hour and a half ago, so I got to rely on my slides a little more. Besides being a foodie and besides being an artist, I'm a ritualist. And so when Marika asked me to put something together, this spoke to me. And over the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to take you on a really big whirlwind tour of ancient rituals, modern rituals, rituals of our own. And there's going to be a brief side trip to history of esoteric thought. And we're going to see how food combs all that together and gives our lens on identity and a worldview. So the essence of ritual is the way that the mind creates order out of chaos. And for any one of you, it can be, the morning, I can't start the day without a cup of coffee. High five, I saw that. The classic definition of ritual is a solemn ceremony consisting of a series of actions performed to a prescribed and precise sequence or gestures which follow a specific order. The aspirant, man, I'm going to drink a lot of water, also uses ritual to attain things beyond ordinary means. If you think about a wedding ceremony, that's a ritual. A quinceañera, that's a ritual. And a bunch of those involve food. We're going to cover a bunch of those, but then we're going to delve into some that you might not ever think of. So what do you think when you think of a food ritual? What comes to mind? What's the first one that pops into your head? What do you know? Good job. Yeah, you'll get your $20 later. But going back a couple millennia, the Japanese, they have their Japanese tea ceremony, very solemn, and austere, but warm and loving about sharing the tea. When I was a kid, okay, I have a confession, I really like Oreos. I had to take the top off the Oreo, 2 of them, to make my own double stuff before it was ever a product. And that was, I think they got it from me. How many of you separate your M&Ms out? See? Is that a little OCD? There is, that one. That was supposed to go down. People who cut their food up in the exact same size. Is it OCD or is it ritual? Well, it kind of depends on how much it feels for you. Like the tea ceremony, there are some cultures that have very old and very elaborate food ceremonies. You're not going to be able to read all of this quickly, but this is the Korean Jesa ritual, and it's done after somebody dies to honor them. Every piece of food up there has to be placed in a specific location. Going to east and west. This one, the dried fish, his head has to go in that direction. You'll see that fish is also. What's another big cultural food ritual that you can think of? Pesach. It's like the ultimate food ritual because it really is all about the food, and then you sing a little bit in between. So the Korean Jesa one, that actually dates back to 2300 BCE. So it is very, very ancient. And part of it is to signify respect for your elders and also align the food in a cosmological order. What do the Christians do? Well, starting back in the Dark Ages, they were given very strict limitations on what they could eat during Lent and during Advent. No meat, no dairy. There is the communal meal that is done every Sunday with the Eucharist. So here, the food constitutes an indispensable aspect of human existence. It serves not only as a sustenance, but as a mirror reflecting the culture and the history and the collective society. So some of you saw the picture of the advertisement with me. There was Pablo Picasso and there was Salvador Dalí, and up top was Aleister Crowley, who is a pretty famous occult ritualist. And I'm going to be delving into him and explaining part of why he's important in this whole story. To do that, I'm going to take you on a whirlwind of esoteric thought. We're going to start with this guy, Mauricio Ficino, and he's quite the dude. Under the sponsorship of Cosimo de' Medici, Ficino was the first person to translate Plato. So he's known as the Neoplatonist, Platonist, because he brought Platonic thought into the 1400s. It's reputed that he's the one who coined the phrase Platonic love. He also translated a tome called the Corpus Hermeticum. And these were the writings of Hermes Trismegistus, who was a Hellenistic era magician writing about astrology and the cosmos, early alchemy. And this book, right there, it laid the groundwork for all of the esoteric and hermetic thought that would follow it over the next 800 years, 900 years. Ficino's own writings were very extensive as well. He wrote almost 20 books, and food-wise specifically, this is what really hit me, in his 3 books on life, he suggested that food and herbs influence the soul via planetary forces through the cosmos. For Ficino, the meals could elevate the intellect. And he's our ritual specialist at this point. So for him, it was accessing the hidden realms through curated consumption. What follows, this is the whirlwind. Contemporary of Ficino was Pico della Mirandola, and he wrote a book, The 900 Thesis, which argued that humanity could ascend towards the divinity through magic and philosophy. Magic at this point is delving back to the Hellenistic thought of angelic rituals, protecting yourself from demons. It's early Kabbalah, it's early astrology. we enter the 1500s with John Dee, who was Queen Elizabeth I's astrologer. He was also reputed to be the most learned man in the country. He had the largest libraries. And when he was traveling and sending secret documents back to the Queen, reporting on what the Italians and the Spanish were doing, he signed those letters 007. It's true. And what he started bringing to the table were more of these thoughts about alchemy and the Kabbalah, which is Judaic mysticism, and astrology. So this age of this Renaissance is when this sort of Hermetic thought really began to explode. From that came the Rosicrucians in the 1600s. They were also steeped in alchemy, and they were one of the first secret societies that began to be created and influenced later occult movements. The 1700s brought Freemasonry, which was not overtly occult, but their use of ritual and esoteric symbolism really kind of laid the groundwork as well. They were the initiatory, they developed the initiatory structures that you would possibly do here, because we're in a ritual space. Masonic temples look very similar to this. 1800s, the Age of Reason. So this is going to be a leap. Charles Darwin wrote The Origin of Species, and also in 1851, the Rosetta Stone was translated. So for a world that was steeped in religious thought, and the church is right, and nobody knows anything but the priests, suddenly there's new knowledge. And through the translation of the Rosetta Stone and the ability to now read hieroglyphs, people can start reading the rituals from ancient Egypt. And they're thinking, maybe we didn't come from God, we came from monkeys. So it was kind of an explosion in this worldview. From that came Theosophists. That was established by, pardon my Russian, my husband can do this better, Helena Blavatsky. Excuse me. Notable authors were also Eliphas Levi, and he wrote most of the occult books of that era that laid the groundwork for what was to come. After the Theosophists, there's the Golden Dawn, and this is the late 1800s. So this is about the time that Aleister Crowley is becoming a teenager, and he's coming into this world and seeing and has been reading this type of hermetic and occult thought, but hasn't really gotten into it yet. Crowley was initiated with the Golden Dawn in 1898, got in a fight with one of their members, William Butler Yeats, went off and joined the Ordo Templi Orientis, which at that time was German, and he took it over and made it his own. And one of Crowley's early initiates was Gerald Gardner, who in the 40s ended up developing the neo-pagan movement, which is now known as Wicca or witchcraft, and from which all of those New Age stores exist. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit, because what was happening in here in these 17 and 1800s was also a slew of philosophers. You've got your Voltaires and your Rousseaus and your Locke's and your Kant's and your Nietzsche's, although he's later. But two really important philosophers for our culinary journey. One was a French lawyer, and if you've ever watched Iron Chef, there's the opening phrase, "Tell me what you eat and I'll tell you what you are." That came from Jean-Antoine Briot-Savarin, who also has a cheese named after him. He wrote a book called The Physiology of Taste, and in it he explored the joys of eating, the role that food had in society, in societal rituals, and the philosophical aspects of gastronomy. His work emphasized the importance of food not only for sustenance, but for that social connection. A little later, Ludwig Feuerbach. He's a 19th century German philosopher who famously stated, "Man is what he eats." This phrase, often associated with his critique of religion and materialism, suggests a deep connection between our physical being and the food we consume. Feuerbach also saw this connection as a way to understand the materiality of human existence. So these men of enlightenment, here we are at the late 1800s, and they've elevated food, to this level of refinement and class, and now we're getting the nouveau riche. So I'm going to do a little quick detour about cutlery. It's really important, trust me. So up until the 1800s, fine dining and these rituals of food was done in a way that was known as service à la française. And it basically means everything comes out at once, and you take what you want. It's family style. The culinary historians in the audience, I'm looking at you, would know that we can credit Russian ambassador Alexander Karakin with bringing service à la Russe to France in 1810. And what happens here is you get a new piece of cutlery for every dish. It's served sequentially. Now, for ritual purposes, for our upper class, this means that it shows your level of where you live in society and what your level of expertise is. It was recommended that if you were well off enough, you would have enough cutlery so that no one would have to wash the silver in between courses. And you would have an engraved, monogrammed napkin holder, or to denote which was your napkin. More importantly, it propelled nonverbal cues of etiquette in these fashionable scenes. So, for example, yeah, I could stop anytime, really. I don't. With a growing desire for greater order and hierarchy in this increasingly chaotic, industrialized society, the various classes became really fastidious about their consumption of food. And for the wealthy, table etiquette reached its apex in this last quarter of the 19th century. Those who could not properly peel an orange with the right knife, or sever an oyster with the oyster fork, or grasp the asparagus with the asparagus tongs, it revealed them as unrefined. They didn't know what they were doing. Isn't that pretty? Oops. So what's all this got to do with artists? Well, staying in the Belle Epoque, I'm going to take you to Paris. I know someone said goody. And of note, I want you to see just how many cafes exploded from the turn of the last century leading up to the Belle Epoque. And there's lots of reasons. I can go into that. It's a whole other lecture if you want to hear it someday. But for the artist and the author and the intellectual, it was a ritual of going to the cafe. And you were going to go hang out with your friends. You were going to talk about the art you were making. You were going to develop a new political party. You were going to get a critique on an article. You were going to be really pissed that your art wasn't accepted into the institutionalized salon. So you're going to make your own art exhibit called the Salon de la Refuse, which became the Impressionists. So besides people watching, this subculture developed among the intellectuals. And there was this ritual of going to the cafe at a specific time. And these were, again, you wouldn't necessarily stay in your studio all day, but you need to go because you want to get order out of the chaos in your brain. And sitting at the cafe with your friends and communing and discussing, that was all part of it. So there was a really brief period of the Franco-Prussian War that happened in about 1870, 1871. And the Prussians put a blockade around Paris. And this was a huge change in the worldview of Parisians. They had to, they ended up running out of food. They ended up having to eat the animals in the zoo. And so the cafe was a place of refuge. So you're at a cafe. What are you going to do? What are you going to drink? No, you're supposed to say wine. I was doing so well. The cafes were also a place to flirt. And, you know, that's it, I can't turn around. He's got her hand on her bottom, and she's obviously digging him. But you look, the girls, they have fine jewelry, so they're hanging out and getting some goods. The artist behind me is denoted by his fluffy tie. He's not dressed as well as she is, but he's really into her. So they're drinking the wine, they're enjoying the wine, but something really horrible happened in France that started in the 1850s, and it was known as the Great Wine Blight. And essentially, phylloxera came in. These are bugs that eat the roots, and it wiped out more than half of the wine industry. At the time, it was 10 billion in francs that they lost. That's about 225 billion today. So you can see how important that was to the French. But we had a bunch of soldiers that had come back from the Algerian War, and somebody mentioned it, absinthe. These soldiers had been issued absinthe to help disinfect their wounds. It was to purify their drinking water and prevent diseases like dysentery. So at the time, it was considered a tonic. But it had been made with wormwood and anise and other botanicals, and it was thought to be pretty healthy. So wine is scarce and more expensive. So yeah, we're going to drink absinthe. And there's this whole ritual about this. Some of the advantages was that it was cheaper and you got a faster high. But there's a ritual to making absinthe. And it's putting this perfectly shaped spoon atop your glass that already has a little bit of absinthe in the bottom, and you put a sugar cube on top, and you slowly dribble water until the sugar cube melts. And what happens is that the liquid inside turns this opalescent, greenish tinge. It was called the louche, to get that beautiful white color. Absinthe was very, very popular. You can see that it was advertised. It was a symbol of urban sophistication. And this was, yet again, one of those rituals. So I mentioned the louche, I mentioned the beautiful green opalescent, and around the 1870s, there became a little problem. There was a little alcoholism. Some artists really believed that that was their muse, and they saw the green fairy. My French is really bad, so it's the Le Fée Verte. But there were addicts, too. Paul Verlaine in the bottom corner, his little circle, Baudelaire, Rimbaud. And I love that we actually have a picture from that era of somebody drinking the absinthe. There's tons of paintings. But you can see that it was both romanticized, with this sexy naked woman, and, look, she's really enticing you. Well, the abolitionists who were trying to get rid of absinthe, they were promoting it as, it's going to eat you alive. It's, the green fairy will get you and you'll be lost forever. It had a reputation as an aphrodisiac and an hallucinogen, and that's from a chemical that came from the wormwood called thujon. The older absinthes had a lot more of the thujon, but people also drank a whole lot more. So the idea that you're going to drink a glass of absinthe now and start seeing green fairies, I'm sorry to tell you, it doesn't happen. I've tried. So I'm going to bring you back to our bad boy of magic, a lover of absinthe and many fine foods. Aleister was born in 1875, so he was growing up when all of this was happening. And as a young man, he was reading Eliphas Levi. He wasn't really an occultist yet. He was going to Cambridge. In Cambridge, he became a massive chess addict. And while this is an older picture of him playing, at the age of 20, going on 21, he went on this grand tour of Paris and Russia just to play chess. And in Russia, he was looking for a chess master to help his game, but he played competitively at Cambridge. He met the Golden Dawn while he was in Paris, and when he came back from the trip, he went to London and he got initiated. This is actually him about 30, but it's a good shot of him being a ritualist. And he, again, I mentioned, very quickly got in a fight with, it was W.B. Yeats and S.L. McGregor Mathers. And so he started to follow another passion of his, which was mountain climbing. And at that same age that he went off to Russia to learn to play chess, he wrote and published his first book, which was about mountain climbing. And he was a serious mountain climber. So around 1899, 1900, he went on the first expedition up K2. And then later, I can't say this very well, Kachachunga. 1902, he went with his hiking or his climbing partner, drew a blank on that, it'll come back. They went off to Mexico to climb the volcanoes there. Oscar Eckenstein, thank you. And in his Mexico trips, specifically, they had been on the mountains, and the tinned food from the Mexican grocery stores were pretty bad. So he brought some of his own, specifically tinned Danish butter and champagne, and wrote about the fact that the last 3 days, that was all they had to eat. So food-wise, he was raised, he had money. He was raised with wealth. He blew it by going on so many trips when he was really young. But as a man with means, he developed this gourmet taste and love, like many, gentlemen of the era. But as he started getting into the occultism and the ritual, he heavily infused food into his various rituals. He wrote what's called the Gnostic Mass, sort of akin to the Catholic Mass, that includes a Eucharist and wine. The Eucharist is called Cakes of Light, and he's got a recipe for that. He wrote an essay on absinthe, and this was about 1918, and it reveals his ceremonial consumption of absinthe. And it's more than a tongue-in-cheek example of some of his serious workings in food. But it involved the slow preparation and the pouring, and again, that ritual sense. They seem like plays now, but these rites of Eleusis were rituals that he had written, one for every planet. And part of those involved having a giant feast at the end. That was, just this, you would fast up to the ritual, cleanse and be pure, and then celebrate at the end. And he bought a little place in Italy called in Cefalù, and that was turned into the Abbey of Thelema. It's very dilapidated, but these are some of the murals that were inside, and this is how it looks today. But it was going to be his own personal religious commune. And there, the people that came, they had to eat in silence and say a prayer before meals. They used food as a sacrament, and there were specific dietary restrictions before certain rituals. So we're in about the 1920s, jumping away from our diehard occultist to another philosopher. Gurdjieff had what was known as the idiot toasts. And they were very, very serious for him. They were part of this larger ritualized meals that he hosted for his students. And the dinners weren't just meals. I mean, they were really grand, but with lots of alcohol. They were deliberately intended to shock the students, out of themselves. And for Gurdjieff, the word idiot, doesn't mean a dunce. It means the ego. And he would, during the toast, he would assign each guest to a specific number. And part of the ritual was that you had to ask somebody else kind of what their purpose in life was. And it had to be a reflection of what idiot they had been ascribed by Gurdjieff. So it wasn't an ordinary idiot in that sense. Like the professional idiot is one who is expert in appearing wise, but is not. The compassionate idiot is one who suffers for others without understanding. So the toast forced the participants to confront their inner state and observe their reactions to being labeled. That's the destruction of the ego. It's humorous, but it's uncomfortable, and it can expose your personal flaws. But if you notice at the end, this is where you would work your way up this hierarchy, kind of like going up the Kabbalistic tree of life. And only 19 and 20 were reserved for the sons of God, and 21 was God himself. Excuse me. So I'm going to bring you back to some artistic movements to incorporate. By the way, the murals on the Abbey at Cefalù, those were painted by Crowley. So he was not only a poet, but he did paint and exhibit his artwork during the era. He just wasn't that good. It's okay. Roughly about the same time as Gurdjieff was this man, F.W. Marinetti, and he coined a manifesto. They were Italian-based, and the futurist movement was this way to emphasize dynamism. This was the beginning of, we're coming out of the industrial age. We're getting cars with speed. We're getting much more technology. The youth is starting to rise, and keep in mind we're going towards the Franco era in Italy, where life gets really sucky. But the artist, what he was doing, the artists in the movement, they were painters and industrial designers and ceramicists. But Marinetti wrote what was ostensibly a cookbook, but it was this manifesto of, like Gurdjieff, breaking out of your ego and doing something very different. There were 11 tenets to the meals that were to be prepared. Excuse me. Things like no cutlery. You had to have the visceral experience of eating with your fingers. There might be a specific piece of music being played. You can see, there's a bed in the back of the cafe. There's a ship's model. So it was bringing aspects and bringing things into that ritual sense that would sort of separate you from just having a regular meal. It I can never get that word. I won't try it. But fascinating was he started to use what equipment that was being invented, and there are things like atomizers. You'd spray a little perfume, the perfect perfume, before you would have a course. There was colloidal mills to pulverize the food, and there were atmospheric and vacuum stills. Sound familiar? It's molecular cuisine. It's what we now know that you can get at places like Atelier Crène or Fat Duck or El Bulli. So it was an early precursor to experimenting with food to turn it into something different. I think that's kind of cool. I need to hold a dinner for that. The Futurist movement died with Marinetti, and that's the date of the 44. But during the height of these dinners, at this point, 30s, was also the rise of the Surrealists. And the term Surrealist was coined by Guillaume Apollinaire in 1917. But the movement didn't really get started until Andre Breton wrote his manifesto in 1924. So the Surrealists looked at food as a portal to the subconscious. And you can think of, the dripping clocks. And actually, I should have put pictures of Dalí's food paintings. The tableware might not be functional. And table manners were deliberately subverted. Dalí was our grand priest of these. And he wrote a cookbook, the Les Dîners de Gala, in the early 70s. But it was based off these dinner parties that he would throw for people, Gala being his wife. The Dinners de Gala, Gala was his muse, and that was his wife. So the pictures here are from the 70s. This was one of the 1970 parties that was hosted by the Baron and Baroness Rothschild. But the most famous one was the first one, which occurred in 1934, and it was known as the Surrealist Banquet. So it was a way of embracing the creativity and, that grand cosmic idea that the Surrealists were looking through the dream world and going beyond what was expected, both in their artwork and with the food. So we all have daily rituals. We have rituals for our creative spirit. We drink coffee every morning. Well, coffee came about in the 9th century in Ethiopia. Can't do that. Ostensibly when a shepherd saw a goat eating some coffee beans and going crazy, which I think is really stupid because you got to roast the coffee. I don't know if eating raw coffee beans is going to help. But beginning in the 15th century, the Sufis started to use coffee in a very ritualistic way, and it helped their spiritual practice for these late night meditations, and it's why coffee really grew to be a ritualized form in the Middle East. So the picture back here, that one works, that's from Ethiopia, and the black clay vessel is known as a jebena. And there's the ritual of Ethiopian coffee. It's worth to go to an Ethiopian restaurant just to do this. They bring it out, and there's a little smoldering coal with frankincense. You get this whole face of incense smoke, and a little thing of popcorn or nuts. And there are 3 cups that are poured. The first one, known as the abol, is the most condensed. It's the strongest. Number 2, using the same grounds, you add fresh water, and that is the tona. And then the third time, same as the other, fresh grounds, the same grounds but fresh water, is the baraka. But you have these 3 glasses, and that's or cups. That's part of the ritual. So the Egyptians have their ritual with coffee. The Sufis have their ritual with coffee. Coffee grows, comes to England in the 1650s, and it becomes integral to our to the social culture, known as penny universities. The coffee houses were patronized by writers and artists and poets, just like they were in Paris, or will become in Paris. But for them, it's all about getting that quick high and that jump from the caffeine. But the coffee houses were also viewed as problematic to authority, and Charles II tried to crush them in 1675. And we're all thankful that he didn't work. So I saw one of you pointing, so this is the Italian mocha for making the Italian coffee. This is a Middle Eastern darka, and this is known as a biggin, and it's British. And it's silver, so I had to include it. What do you have with your coffee? Sugar? Well, kind of like that. Patricia Highsmith, who wrote the Riley books and Strangers on a Train, she would start every morning sitting in bed, cigarettes, ashtray, matches, big mug of coffee, donut, very important, and also a little extra cup of sugar. So she'd like take the sugar cubes and dip them in the coffee and suck on them, which if you've ever seen the movie Red Shoes, Lermontov does it as well. He's wearing a green gown. I'm going to the scene, but you could see that. Patricia Highsmith actually didn't care about food otherwise, but her donuts were important. And this was a way of making her space as comfortable as possible to be creative. Later years, I think she gave up coffee for vodka, but that's another story. So I talked briefly about the Franco-Prussian War. Victor Hugo decamped from Paris. He was just across the pond in Guernsey. His mistress actually lives like 9 doors away, but every morning he gets a cup of coffee, 2 raw eggs, and a letter from her. And that's his morning ritual before he starts writing at 11 o'clock. Honoré de Balzac had this brutal writing schedule. He would have a very light dinner at 6 o'clock, and then he'd go to bed. He'd get up at 1 a.m. and have this 7-hour writing stint. He would just write like crazy. Then he would take a 90-minute nap, wake back up, and that is when he would start the coffee, sometimes upwards of 50 cups a day. He's also the guy who, if you went out to dinner with him, would start the dinner with 5 dozen oysters, which I talk about in my oyster book. So, speaking of quirky coffee drinkers, I had to go there. David Lynch was actually a very spiritual man. He practiced transcendental meditation every day for 40 years. But he'd also go to Bob's Big Boy. And I'm going to read the quote, because this was just, he took his food rituals very seriously. For 7 years, I ate at Bob's Big Boy. And if you're from Southern California, you know Bob's Big Boy has like the most kick-ass burgers. I drank a chocolate shake and 4, 5, 6, 7 cups of coffee with lots of sugar. And there's a lot of sugar in that chocolate shake. It's a thick shake. I would get a rush from all this sugar, and I would get so many ideas that I would write them on these napkins. It was like I had a desk with paper. All I had to do was remember to bring my pen, but a waitress would give me one if I remembered to return it at the end of my stay. I got a lot of ideas at Bob's. So, we're looking at this excess, the excess of a milkshake, the excess of Honoré de Balzac's coffee and oysters. The opposite of that was the aesthetic. And Marika put Picasso on the picture as well. Well, he was a big gourmand in his youth, but he became very austere in middle age. He adopted a Mediterranean diet. It was light fruits and vegetables. But on doctor's orders, he could have a spinach souffle. But he gave up alcohol. He was drinking milk or water. Agnes Martin, who, if you've been to SF MoMA, she does these very orderly grids. There's a whole Agnes Martin temple at SF MoMA I recommend. She lived in New Mexico, and she would go for months on nothing but walnuts and hard cheese and garden tomatoes. Sometimes for breakfast, she would have orange juice and bananas with a little gelatin. Georgia O'Keeffe grew her own food. She liked whole grains and raw food. Now it's the whole food movement. And she would start every day with a vegetable smoothie. So to wrap it up, whether you're pouring your absinthe or counting your coffee beans, which Beethoven, 60 coffee beans per had to happen, or arranging your cutlery just so, simply making sure your green M&Ms are separate from your brown ones, you're participating in a long, strange, beautiful history of food as ritual. And, in the end, we're all a bit mystical at the dinner table. It's, every meal is a ceremony. One of Aleister Crowley's tenets is a feast every day on your hearts. It's a feast for living and a feast for dying and a feast every day on your hearts. We can see how meals become stages for the sacred and the personal and the creative. And across centuries and cultures, food remains not just sustenance, but a profound language of ritual, a way to transform the ordinary act of eating into an extraordinary act of being. Thank you. And there's that. Oh, okay.
Wow, that was amazing. We have a few minutes for questions. Would anybody like to ask Carolyn a question? No questions? Oh.
Thank you. You want to know where to get a good Bob's Big Boy Burger, huh?
So in your research, what's the weirdest dish that you've come across that you would consider trying?
Well, I have to add this caveat that I'll try anything once. And so I've already eaten some really weird shit. I've had lots of insects, cheese toast with scorpions, beef pizzle, so weird is sort of subjective. Now, if you think back to like Joseph Conrad and The Power of Myth, the early civilizations had this concept of sympathetic magic. And that's where, to get smarter, you eat walnuts because they look like brains. And to get more virulent, virulent, it's another word, asparagus, bananas, and there is this erotic association that some foods, I'm sorry, oysters, hello, sex, what's it look like? So that is part of that ritual for them as well. If we think back to that time, where you would eat what you would want to be or what you wanted to have happen for you. That help?
Other question?
I've always wondered, how has it evolved that food and eating is such a communal activity, whereas a lot of the other things that we all do each day is individualistic?
Well, you go back to the Paleolithic man, they're hunting together. They managed to fell one deer. Everyone's got to participate, to get their share. And there are some tribes that they would deliberately feed people that, if Joe can't go out on the hunt, he is just as entitled to part of that animal as the rest of the tribe. And so they would sort of cycle the members of the tribe to make sure everybody participated in part of the ritual of skinning the animal and sharing. But the earliest forms of community in that was just, sharing a meal. I briefly, when I think, what's the oldest form of artwork? Wrong. Before that, there were tribes that would empty out an ostrich shell and use it as a canteen. And shards of those ostrich shells, which date back 150,000 years before the cave paintings, are carved. So they were making a communal meal, and then they were reusing that ostrich egg. That's a great trivia question. I always get people with that one.
Hi, I was really interested to hear about the dinners that you've put on, and I'm wondering, as part of that Bay Area Culinary History group, are you putting on any in the near future?
So Bay Area Culinary Historians, Bach, that's our mascot. Yes, we do 2 or 3 a year. We have gone to Sam's Grill, and I worked with the chef to recreate a 1910 menu. Last summer was our Roman banquet. That was entirely potluck. This August, I'm working with the chef at Trader Vic's, and we are going to be recreating a 1950 menu. Every year, our Christmas party, we always kind of pick a theme, and because of my silver collection, I sort of insisted we had to do a Dickensian Christmas dinner because, you know, cutlery, it's important. So we do events at restaurants that can help me recreate a meal, or last month I was in Los Angeles and I worked with a gallery and we recreated a Salvador Dalí dinner. And that was truly extraordinary. So, and that's the second time I've done a Dalí dinner. The Dalí dinner? Well, you know, the cookbook, he didn't actually write the recipes. Most of the recipes came from the chefs at Maxime's, you know, or these really fancy French restaurants. But it was this way of plating. So the prawns were done in this very large tower. And for the dessert, we made a coconut panna cotta, but on top was a sliced kiwi and a little dot of black, so it looked like an eyeball. Because, you know, if you've seen the Salvador Dalí movie that's, you know, kind of hard to watch, don't Google it if you are queasy. And then it was plated on some raspberry coulis, so it looked like the eyeball was floating in blood.
You alluded to some forbidden foods and restrictions on food in the Christian faith around Lent.
Mm-hmm.
We're familiar with restrictions on food in the Jewish and Muslim and Hindu faiths. Are there ongoing restrictions, whether here, mainstream Christianity, or other Christian sects? Are there still forbidden fruits as part of the ritual?
Well, there are many people that still will only eat fish on Fridays. And, you know, for me growing up, you know, it was always fish sandwich on Fridays at the school because they didn't know, you know, who was following that. And it was so extensive. When this little factoid came out, when they found Richard III's bones in the parking lot, they were able to do tests on his bones, and he had a mostly seafood diet because during that era there were many more days, many more Lent days and non-food days. And as a side note, this came out of a lecture I gave last month on the Impressionists. There were monks in France who kind of figured out that because frogs were in the water, that they must be okay for fish days, and that's why the French eat frog legs.
Okay, maybe